So, two videos today, guys. This one I wanted to do, it was a question that came up yesterday on our Dealmakers Institute calls. And so I was like, hey, why are you doing royalties? And, what's up with this whole royalties thing? It's interesting. When you think about royalties, most people think about Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, on Shark Tank. And, if you watch Shark Tank, you'll know, even after a few episodes, that Kevin O'Leary loves royalties. And so while everybody else is fighting for equity, he's fighting for royalties. And, usually has some different terms based on what the deal is. It could be a certain percentage of royalty up until this point, and then something else in perpetuity. And so it's interesting that I think on the surface, people have heard of royalties. Even if you don't watch Shark Tank, you've heard of royalties when it comes to songs and things like that. So when it comes to doing royalties in a micro private equity environment, there are basically three main benefits. And it's similar to, I think, the benefits that Kevin O'Leary sees. And one of the reasons that the company that we're taking public does royalties, and why even in my personal portfolio, I'm very, very keen on adding as many royalties to my personal portfolio as possible. So reason number one is that you end up more like a bill than an investor. And here's what I mean by that. When you buy equity in a business, or even when you buy a business, you're going to get a portion of the profits. Or if you're the only buyer of the business, you're going to get all the profits. Well, a royalty is even better than that because the royalty is going to get paid, like I said, like a bill. And what that means is that the royalty owner gets paid based on the revenue. So it's like anything else. If your business has rent, you're going to pay rent. If your business pays for hosting for your website, you're going to pay for that. It has inventory, you're going to pay for that. And then it's going to have a royalty bill as well. And then that gets paid. And then everything after those bills is the profit. And so it's kind of like getting on the front end of the business and getting paid first. It's legit what it is. The reason number two that I'm a big fan is that unlike giving a loan, it's kind of this space in between. There's a lot of the benefits of lending and a lot of the benefits of having equity. So royalties are kind of this thing that's right in the middle. And when you look at kind of the downside to having a loan, one of the biggest downsides is that your upside is very limited. You're going to get 8%, 9%, whatever your rate of return is. That's what you're going to make. And you hope that things don't go bad, because the only thing that could happen outside of you making that 8% is that the person defaults and you don't get all your money back and you make a negative return. So there's no real upside and there's a lot of downside. On the equity side, you've got a lot of upside, but you also get a lot of the downside if things don't work. And so royalties are this thing that's in the middle, like a loan. I mentioned in number one, you're getting paid like a bill, but like equity, you get that upside. So as the business grows and it does really well, it's interesting because as I build a portfolio of these micro royalties, you end up in almost like a franchisor. And this is kind of what we were talking about on the Dealmakers call. It's kind of like a kind of like a franchisor. So, a franchisor, when I've owned franchises in the past, essentially I pay a royalty based on the revenues of the business. But that franchisor is motivated for me to make as much money as possible, because the more money I make, the more money they make. So they do research, they get ideas from other businesses, they figure out things that they can do on their end to grow the business, things that you can do internally to grow the business. And so they're feeding the business with all of these ways to grow. And that's something that I'm motivated to do, even though the businesses are different. And so I talk a lot about being like a fund manager, or, having a portfolio of businesses. And one of the benefits is that you can have one business that has a similar customer base, or has similar traffic, or has access to resources that another business in the portfolio can benefit from. And you can create those symbiotic relationships for them to take advantage of that synergy and both grow. And so if I've got that in my royalty portfolio, that still behooves me to try to create those relationships, give advice, be that person that's motivated. When you look at the comparison to the bank, they don't have a lot of motivation. There's not a lot of motivation to help you be successful, because they don't really get as much of the upside if you grow. They just want to make sure you pay that bill every month and that you pay off that loan. So reason number 3, and this is one that's really unique compared to everything else that we do in the micro private equity world. Unlike other investments, royalties aren't considered a security. And so, you can't just go online and say, hey, I've got a company, it's making this much money, pay for some Google advertising and get investors. But with a royalty, you can easily sell those. You can advertise those for sale. You can do whatever. It's just, it's considered a separate thing. And it's interesting. I was reading some stuff, and it's one of the something that the music industry fought for, was for this to be considered something separate from security, so that they can freely be able, and a musician can freely be able to go out and sell their royalties and get that money and do whatever deals that they want to with the royalties that they own. So these fall under that. And it just means that it's way easier for you to have liquidity within royalties. So it's a long-term thing of being able to benefit, get cash flow. But in all of this stuff, I talk about this even when it comes to businesses. It's one of the benefits to doing micro private equity deals is that there's a lot more people that can buy $1 million business than who can buy a $20 million business. And so that creates liquidity. So with royalties, there's kind of this other level of liquidity within that micro private equity world. So 3 things that I like about royalties, why I'm doing a lot more of those. If you're interested in hearing more about how that works, feel free to comment below. If you're not subscribed, you should subscribe. I don't know why you wouldn't. So be sure to subscribe, be sure to like, and thanks so much. Have a great weekend.